Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in this week. We have a great episode. But before I introduce the guest, as always, I want to run a few things by you. First, please follow, subscribe, rate, and review the show. It helps boost the podcast, grow the exposure, and ultimately allows me to get the best guests for you. So it's a win-win for everyone. So please go do that. Additionally, go follow me on social media. Instagram and Twitter is where I am at. And if you go to my Twitter, at the top of the profile, you will see the review newsletter, which you can subscribe to. And it just makes it easy for you to get access to updates, occasional blog posts, news about guests, and anything that is going to happen in the future of the show. And just it's an easiest way to get the podcast to your inbox every Tuesday. I release the episodes on Monday, and Tuesday the newsletter goes out. One more thing, please consider supporting this independent podcast. I made the decision not to work with any sponsors on this podcast. I wanted to be independent, at least for now. That is the decision. So if you can help support the podcast, that will mean a lot. And one final thing, if you want to start your own podcast, I have a full tutorial that covers everything you need to know, soup to nuts, A to Z. How to start, grow, execute, market, reach out to guests, what equipment you need, just really everything, why you should even start a podcast, like what are the benefits, what are the reasons, what is the future of podcasting, everything you need to know about podcasting I have in this ebook. So it's in the show notes. Feel free to check that out. And all right, let's move on to the guest. This week I have Brandon Fitzgerald. Brandon is a UFC announcer, and he is the host of Fitz Nation podcast. He is part of the broadcast team with usually Bisping and either Felder or Cruz. And as someone who is a massive UFC fan, I always love it when I have someone from the UFC to just get a little bit more insight, to get a behind the scenes as to what's going on in the UFC, how they prepare for events, what it's like during the broadcast of the live event. What are some dynamics that happen between him and maybe other fighters or other people in the broadcast team, and just to get a clearer idea, because it's one thing when you see it on TV, and then I'm sure it's another thing behind the scenes. So he was kind enough with his time to come on the podcast, and we had a blast, just to learn also more about him, what his background was, how he got into the UFC, what have been some memorable nights or events that he's had as a broadcaster for the UFC. And yeah, I just tried to get a little peek into the behind the scenes of what it's like to be on the broadcast team, and just to understand his journey from where he was, how he got into the UFC, what it's been like since he got there. And it was very illuminating conversation, and I'm real happy that I got the chance to talk to him. So without further ado, let's jump right into the episode. Here is Brandon Fitzgerald. Enjoy the episode, everyone.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
All right, and we're live. How you doing, Brandon? Thanks for coming on the podcast.
I'm doing good, Roy. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me. Excited.
Yeah, man. I'm not a big sports fan at all. I don't really watch sports, but I love martial arts, and specifically, I love MMA, and more specifically, I love the UFC. Right. So when I get to have someone from the organization and kind of get a little behind the scenes look, I always love these type of episodes.
Yeah. Thanks, man. It's funny how some people that love the UFC are huge sports fans, and they love it because it is a sport and competition, all the drama that surrounds it. And you do get plenty of people like you that don't watch any other sports or don't really get into that whole world, but still love martial arts. I think that's why Dana White says it's like this sport it can appeal to everybody. It doesn't appeal to everybody, but it can appeal to everybody.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's the ultimate sport. I don't think there's anything that comes close as far as technical ability, grit, the drama, the build-up, I've been to a few events, even like the live events. Just everything about it it's like this perfect combination of like high level skills meets entertainment meets drama, all in this one, like all this one box that you just present to a consumer and be like, hey, Come enjoy this.
I was thinking about this the other day, is that it's very, it compares very well with real life. Like sports, like, watch the NFL, for instance, and, oh, did that guy's toe step out of bounds? We want to get it right. And then they're always like, getting it right is the most important thing. But in life, not everything is fair. Not everything is right, and all that sort of other stuff. And there's a lot of that in MMA, I think, in a good way, where it's just like, this is how it is. The drama, the buildup, who's popular? Do they deserve to be popular? Does their skill match up with the best? It's like, you look at your own life, you look at maybe whatever business you're in, and it's not like the most talented are always at the top. Most of the time it is, but there's other factors that go into all these different things. And, fighting is very much like that. And MMA is very much like that in terms of how it all works. And so there's a lot of parallels with just like everyday life, the fairness of it, the unfairness of it at sometimes, the overnight success, but then much more often the long grind. You could be the 10-year overnight success story type of thing. And, it just resonates with a lot of people and a lot of their stories.
Yeah, there's something about, even for, if you are I don't know, whatever, an independent entrepreneur, or if you work for a company, or if you just want to progress your life and better yourself in any which way, quite often we go to these inspirational videos, and more often than not, at least for me, it's fighters, and you hear their story. And like you said, you take that parallel and you inject it into your own experience. And it's like, you hear the how he grinded, how he slept on the floor, how he lost in the beginning and then overcame, and now he's the successful human, and how he had to wake up in the morning to run at 5 a.m. when it's 15 degrees out or whatever. And you take that experience and you're like, oh shit, like if he can do that, I can do that. So for me, that's just something that always works. Now there's a lot of like, fake inspirational stuff on social media, which I don't like. But that part always really talked to me.
I think that yeah, I mean, it's all about what you take from stuff. It's not like it's wrong or bad to just watch something for pure entertainment. But for me, like, things started coming alive when I started to try to take something from everything, whether it's Game of Thrones, whether it's a book, whether it's a comedy TV show, whether it's sports, instead of just laughing at it or just watching it as like this observer, if you kind of feel it a little bit more, then like you can really get a lot more from that. And MMA is like you don't have to be or want to be a UFC fighter to really like learn from stuff, take from it, apply it to your life, see where the parallels are. Like, you don't have to sleep on the floor of a gym and be homeless, but you can be like, well, I wanted to start this company, but I needed to pay the bills. So the only time I had to do it was if I woke up at 6 a.m, put 2 hours into it before I went to work. Then you're kind of living that life in your own realm. And for me, that's certainly a big part of why I love it.
So what's your background? Do you have MMA background? I want to just know a little bit more about how you got into the UFC, because being a fighter, it's pretty straightforward. You train, you fight, you go up the ranks, you go into a divisional organization, and you kind of grow from there. But what's the progress like, or the process to get to be a broadcaster for the UFC?
Well, a lot of people ask me because they want my job. And it's like, I understand. Not like I want to take your job, just like someday I want to like announce fights or work at the network level and love this sport. And so I get it. Like the same way that I would have asked, Jim Nantz a long time ago, how do I call a Super Bowl type of thing? But I always tell people, like, the reason why I've risen to the level I have is because I loved sports broadcasting, not because I loved MMA and the UFC. Now, like, I love it, but the ultimate thing for me was working as a sports broadcaster. So my road was major in journalism in college with a broadcast emphasis. Okay. I got into local news as a sports anchor. So, lived in all different parts of the country. My first on-air job was in Casper, Wyoming. I was the sports anchor in Casper, Wyoming at the NBC affiliate. After that, I was the sports anchor on the weekends at a CBS affiliate in South Texas. After that, I worked in Boston. What kind of sports? So like you're watching, you're in Denver. When you turn on the local news at night, they're covering the Broncos, the Rockies, the Nuggets, the Avalanche, right? They're covering the local teams. Well, when you go to those small places in Casper, I'm on the NBC affiliate. We're local news. Our local sports are high school football, high school sports. Okay. There was like a low level single A baseball team. I'm from Boston. So obviously in Boston, yeah, that's what you cover. But in Wyoming, where there's no pro teams, what do you cover? It's just like, you cover the way that people cover the Broncos in Denver. We cover the high school sports teams in Casper. Okay. That's what it is at the local level. And, and then whatever happens to be popular in that area. So rodeos were a thing in Casper. I would go to rodeos to shoot highlights and cover, rodeos in terms of like showing the highlights. And
was that a bit of a culture shock coming from Massachusetts?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like to go in the media area at a rodeo, or to go into the cowboy area at the rodeo as a member of the media, it was like written in the rules. If you wanted to go in there to like interview the cowboys after their rides or before, whatever it is, you needed to have jeans, a tucked in button down shirt, a cowboy hat, and boots. You needed to like look like a cowboy. And I was just like, and my station is so low budget at that level. I'm like, I'm not buying cowboy boots out of my own money. Like, like they're expensive on top. I did end up getting a cowboy hat, like to be, whatever. And I still have it on the wall. But like, that was and I was just like, this is weird, but it's just part of it. Like, what if you had to dress up like a football player to go interview a football player? I was like, that's the equivalent. This is very, very strange, but that's wild. That's the way I don't know exactly the genesis of the rule. I never, when you didn't have to go into that area, and I didn't, but so very, very different, but very, very valuable if you're going to go into this line of work. Like if I can go up, I had a boss tell me once upon a time, like, you're going to be so much better for that, because to go be a kid from Massachusetts who's into the Red Sox, Bruins, Patriots, Celtics, pro sports, college sports, to go to places like that and try to fit in and be on TV and like be a part of the local community and cover the things that they care about, then you can kind of break down that wall. So if you can do that in a place as unique as Wyoming, and then South Texas, like by the border of Mexico, where there were a lot of people that didn't even speak English. So you're going to a soccer game and it's like, you're in the United States, but like you go to a soccer game and afterwards you're talking to this high school soccer coach that barely speaks English.
Yeah.
So
and you're also not your wheelhouse and so outside of your comfort zone.
Exactly. But as a result, then if you can do that, you can do anything. Then covering a sport that you know about and really like and know the players involved is like a layup. All of a sudden on that Patriots practice, what am I going to ask Tom Brady? Well, it's just like, or what am I going to ask this player, the coach? Well, like I'm speaking the same language now, and I've done that. If I can do that, I can do this. So long story short, came up the ranks for local news, then worked at ESPN covering college sports. And that was mostly a studio show of doing highlights and stuff, which is most of the job anyways. When you're in the studio, it's doing highlights, it's tossing the sound bites and stuff. Then got laid off of ESPN in 2017. The UFC was starting Dana White's Contender Series that summer.
Yeah.
So I got an audition to join the UFC. And so to bring it full circle, now I was not intimidated with the audition, but I didn't know how it was going to go. I'd never called fights. I didn't really know a lot about the UFC because I was covering other sports on Saturdays. I knew the crossover fights. I had watched the UFC. But when you're covering college football, that's Saturday night. You know what I mean? That's big Saturday. There's 100 games.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't leave time to watch the UFC for 6 hours on Saturdays. But because I was so good at covering different things that I did not know about and like getting that skill, then I was able to like do well at it, even though I knew how to crash for it. I knew I knew what I needed to learn. I knew what I should kind of focus on before an audition. And then like as a result, I did well enough in the audition to get the job. And then on top of that, turns out I loved the hell out of it. On my first Contender Series show, at the end of it, I was just like, that was like a new drug that I've never had before.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with it right away. Here we are almost 5 years later.
So what's an audition like? What do they make you read or do?
So an audition was for that role is calling fights. You know, they were looking for a play-by-play announcer for the Contender Series. So it was UFC 212, which was when Max went down to Rio, fought Jose Aldo the first time.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, I can remember so much about this. I believe it was June 3rd, 2017, UFC 212 in Rio. I could tell you most of the fights on that card. I called 4 fights.
Okay.
There were some other crews there auditioning or whatever. They called the first 4, the last 4. I called the middle 4. And we were in California. We weren't in Rio.
Yeah.
We weren't in Rio. We were in California. We were calling it off a TV in a studio. And then they just put it on tape and, showed it to Dana. And they had a meeting of looking at people that were going to be on the Contender Series. And I was one of the people they called.
That's wild. Were you excited when you got it? When you got the call?
Yeah, I was. I thought the ship had sailed because it had been a few weeks. That was so it was early June. The show was starting July 11th was the first episode. And I remember thinking, well, if it's going to start July 11th, I should probably find out within 2-3 weeks. And like a couple of weeks had went by and I hadn't heard anything. And so I was just like, well, I probably didn't get it, but I didn't know.
Yeah.
And then I found out that they were still considering, because I texted somebody else that auditioned. He's just like, oh, I haven't heard either. They're still making their decision. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm in the running on this. And I found out like the weekend of 4th of July, I was at my brother-in-law's house because he has a big 4th of July party. And I got a phone call from my like now boss and, went well, whatever. And I kind of walked back in and I was just like, all right, I guess I'm a UFC announcer. I was excited. I was excited because,
awesome.
I was laid off and in between jobs at the time.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like freaking out. It wasn't like, we're like, oh, how are we? I had a good attitude about it, but it was like, all right, here's another opportunity. Like,
yeah,
I got it. Like the audition is one thing. All right, let's see what comes of it. All right, now, I'm going to show up. They're going to pay me for a few dates for the Contender Series, and let's see how this goes. Yeah. It was out of left field, but I was very excited for how new it was.
Yeah,
and how like the adventure that it was.
And then I guess the teams, I don't know how exactly this works. I don't know if it's random or they have a reason why they put it, but you're usually with Felder, Cruz, and Bisping, obviously not all 3 of them together, but a combination of the 2. And by the way, I love the banter between Cruz and Bisping. They should get like a spinoff and just insult each other for like 30 minutes on like a YouTube show. They're really funny. But yeah, how did that combination happen? And like, how was it like just this immediate chemistry that you had with the other guys, or was, how does it work?
Yeah. I mean, I always pride myself on having good being a good teammate.
Yeah.
I want to be a good teammate. Chemistry on air, like, it's not like I've ever had this animus relationship with somebody that I had to work with on the air. Like, I feel like I'm pretty easy to get along with. I don't have a big ego in terms of people that are on air and whatever. I've never wanted to be that person where, like from a movie or a TV show where they shut the lights off and then I'm an asshole. Like, oh, get out of here. I'm trying to work. What is this going to do for me? I've never wanted to be that person. I've told my boss, I'm just like, if I ever become that person, you tell me right away.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a result, I feel like I'm pretty easy to work with. And my job, I know my role as the play-by-play announcer, and I know my job is to get the best out of the analyst. Like their star is bigger. You know what I mean? Like Michael Bisping is a bigger deal than me. Dominic Cruz is a bigger deal than me. I know that. So as a result, I know that the fans want to hear from them probably more than they want to hear from me in most respects of fighting. Mm-hmm. Obviously, when it comes to the play-by-play and the call and my professional expertise in that realm, then I know that's kind of where my bread is buttered, so to speak. So, but in terms of the chemistry, like, and that's also up to the behind this, our boss, who kind of matches things up and thinks who might work well with who. And I didn't audition with Felder but they thought Brendan and Felder, like he's from Philly, I'm from Massachusetts. Like they kind of knew us. I bet they'll do good together. I bet they'll be good. And sure enough, we were like, met Felder. The first episode of the Contender Series was that I did because they had two crews, Dan Helly and Eve Edwards were the other one. And so the first episode was July 18th. It was actually episode 2 of that first season. Felder fought Stevie Ray 2 days before we were supposed to do that broadcast, which is kind of risky looking back at it. When Felder started fighting, they wouldn't put him on broadcast the next week. Like it's just like not a good idea. They actually had him on the desk in Prague a couple of years ago to do the broadcast, and he fought James Vick the week before. Well, when the Prague show happened, Paul Felder was still in the hospital in Arizona because he had a punctured lung and whatever. So they stopped doing that. But 2 days before Paul Felder fights Stevie Ray in Scotland, he hops on a 10-hour red eye from Scotland to Las Vegas. And I met Paul on Monday, and we were buddies right away. We went out to dinner that night. Laura Sanko was with us. And we were all just like friends right away. It was just very cool. We're all very similar parts of our lives. Other than the difference of Felder being a fighter and me being a guy in a suit. But, we have kids the same age, what was that, 2017. So we both had like 2-year-olds at the time, so it's like a new parent thing and whatever. So, like quick friends in terms of, I feel like they're confident. The UFC is confident that they can put me with anybody. Because when you think about it, like I've worked with DC, Cruz, Bisping, Felder, worked with Jimmy Smith when he was with us, worked with Dan Hardy when he was with us. Like I can be with anybody and have fun with it. And so I think that's one of my strengths is that they don't have to, Brendan works well with Bisping, but he doesn't really do well with Cruz. Like that's not really part of it.
Is Dan Hardy officially off the UFC? Because I know like they used to do the European shows, but now with COVID, I just know I know he had that thing with he was in the news. I don't want to get into it. That's never been my. It wasn't. It's not for me to comment on. But Dan Hardy's not part of the broadcast team. Right okay. All right. Yeah. Is it hard sometimes covering? Because I'm sure obviously with Felder, and then there's other fighters that I'm sure over the past 5 years you've kind of created maybe a deeper relationship. Yeah. Is it a bit harder to cover them when they're fighting?
Like it hasn't happened for me, but I think twice I was part of the broadcast when Felder was fighting. One time I was hosting the desk, in New Zealand when he fought Dan Hooker in the main event. I was down there and I did the pre-fight show on Friday and I did the post-fight show on Saturday. So that was when you're doing that role, you get to just watch the fights, and it's not like I'm a fan, like cheering or, whatever. It was very cool to be a part of that because Auckland is a great city, other side of the world. That's one of the biggest perks of the job is all the traveling to, not just the traveling, but the traveling to the very unique places that you don't just go on a weekend trip with your wife to Auckland, New Zealand, And so, Auckland was cool. The people down there, awesome. Is just, it was sold out. And then like Dan Hooker, they're obviously there to support him. It was a great fight, so I was gutted that he lost that fight, but that wasn't really the challenge. It's not a challenge because then I called his main event against Rafael dos Anjos, short notice. He was supposed to be on the broadcast with us. He was supposed to be the color commentator. Then Makhachev falls out. Yeah. And then all of a sudden Paul's just like, all right, I'll step in. And,
he's a wild boy.
My producer was in my ear, kind of making sure that we weren't heavy bias on Felder, which I didn't think we were, but they were just hypersensitive to it because they're friends with him too, because he's on our broadcast. And so that's a line you got to really walk carefully. And I didn't think I was unfair and I wasn't trying to be. And it wasn't like this, I don't know, like it was easier than I thought it was going to be, not harder. Obviously, like when somebody, you want the best for them. So obviously, it's like, but at the same time, like, I feel like I'm a professional enough where I'm in that chair and it's just like, okay, I also like Rafael dos Anjos. Like he's been a nice guy to me and whatever. I just don't know him that well. So yeah, it was easier than I thought it was. It really wasn't that much of a challenge. And Anna has dealt with a lot more than I have because he called Cormier title fight, Bisping title fights, that sort of stuff. And Bisping, I never called one of his fights and he retired before. Cormier never did. And he's obviously retired now. Cruz is Cruz, I haven't had to call, and I guess he's an active fighter too. Paul's not an active fighter anymore. So it's not really an issue now for the most part. But you just have relationships in the sport, and you just got to deal with them when it's time to call the action.
Yeah. It's funny. There's a few fighters, Bisping, Chael Sonnen, DC, that when they were fighters, personally, I wasn't the biggest fan. I didn't like the persona, or
right.
Maybe at the time, the people they fought, I was a bigger fan of the people they fought. For whatever reason, I didn't like them at the time. And then when they quit and they took on this other role, I absolutely loved them. Yeah. I absolutely love them. So it's just funny when they change up the role that they're in, how differently you see them.
Yeah. And DC who was DC talking about this with? I can't remember if it was on a show or if it was like in a shuttle van when we were like going somewhere, but DC was, because there was, people love DC. A lot of people love DC. Now he's got his haters too, but a lot of people love DC. And he was just like, I always thought I needed the belt to be loved, to be the champion. And then you realize at a certain point, like, your people are going to love you regardless. Then there comes a point where they start liking you for who you are. And it doesn't matter that you're the champion. So like when you lose the belt, they don't care about that. You don't need the belt to be famous and to be popular and to be well-liked and to have a lot of fans. And it like hit him at one point. I imagine that's for a lot of fighters where they're trying to navigate their way. All of them want to be UFC champions. And they probably hit a tipping point at some point. Some find it earlier because of the belt's importance to them, whether it's everything that they want or whether it's just a side benefit. They just want to live the life of a fighter. But certainly things can shift over the years. And then people get older. Bisping's a different guy now than he was when he was 25. Yeah. And so you get more mature, you grow up a little bit. You look back at some of the things you did when you're 25, just as you probably do and I do, and just be like, well, that's not me anymore. But for them, it was in the spotlight. So it's a lot different. And it made them bigger than they were. It sold more pay-per-views. It put more money in their pocket,
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't imagine navigating myself, I guess, in front of cameras as you kind of grow and develop. That's why, like, whenever I hear, and like, I don't know, people shit on like someone like Justin Bieber. Yeah. Like, this guy, he was like, what, 12 when they found him? Like,
very different to be famous at 14. You try it.
Yeah. Think about how many stupid things you've done throughout your life, and to have it all be on camera, broadcast in front of the whole world when you fuck up and when you don't know something or when you have a bad moment, and then everyone memes the hell out of it and mocks you. And so it's hard. I can't imagine it's being, especially like fight week, right? Or I don't know, whatever. There's a big fight coming up. How much hours do they have of press on fight week on average?
I mean, it depends. If you say, a fight night, like the bigger fighters, is a lot different. Yeah, it's not like the bigger fighters. It's still not a ton, and it varies wildly depending on what type of an event it is. So let's say you're a big fighter. Let's take Masvidal. Let's take Colby and Usman in New York. Okay. So they're in the number one media market in the world. They're headlining one of, if not our biggest pay-per-view, probably one of the biggest pay-per-views of the year, Madison Square Garden, world's most famous arena. They're in New York. So there's going to have a ton, because like, if you're a prelim fighter that week, you might just have to show up to media day on Wednesday, and that's it. You show up to media day, you talk for a half hour to whatever reporters might want to talk to you. Maybe you appear on a podcast if you want to, whatever. But in terms of UFC required media, it's Wednesday. If you're then on Friday you make weight, Saturday you do the thing, and post-fight press conference if you win. But like if you're Kamaru Usman, the welterweight champ in that situation, you're doing media day on Wednesday. You're doing a live press conference on Thursday. You're probably going to ESPN in Connecticut, like 2 hours away. They're going to drive you. You're going to be on SportsCenter live in person. You're probably going to be on more ESPN radio shows and whatever, obviously with the proximity to New York. But same thing, like Francis Ngannou and Brandon Moreno probably did a ton of press last week in the LA area. I don't know exactly exactly all the shows that he was on, but he was on sports networks. He was probably on some radio shows. He's probably on a lot of podcasts, in addition to media day, in addition to the press conference. Like there's stuff there.
Yeah.
So it depends on what level you're at. If you're at the apex, it's pretty simple. It's Wednesday, media day. And that's kind of it. And then after the fight on Friday. And that's usually what it is on like a fight night event. If we go to, like Chiesa posted 2 years ago, we were in Raleigh. And I did that show, and it's just like, okay, if you're in Raleigh, you get a few local news members, you do some local media stuff on Wednesday afternoon on media day, or maybe Thursday, I guess is what it was when we were on the road, because that's when we do our fighter meetings with the broadcast team. And then, then after the fight. So it really depends.
Do you enjoy doing the broadcast from the Apex? I'm sure you get this question all the time, but
yeah,
the fans versus non-fans.
Yeah, it's a love-hate thing. There's a lot of factors that go into it. Like, I just try not to. I don't love it or hate it. I try not to be like, oh, I can't wait for this to be over, or like I'm dreading going back on the road. But the reality is, from a family and kind of work life perspective, like, I'm in my own bed every night. There's no travels. There's no airport delays. There's, my wife, I can support her with my son. I can still get him off to school, do everything I need to do, and pick him up from school in the same day.
It's awesome.
And still you know what I mean? And then Saturday's a busy day at work, but I had breakfast at home, and then I go in, I do the show, and then I'm at home.
Yeah.
So that part is great. The trade-off is not as many fans, right? It's a very small environment. It's become very regular. I was talking about this yesterday. Like it's the equivalent of a Zoom chat in your pajama pants and call it work. It's like, it's very simple. It's very easy. It doesn't feel as big anymore. For a while it felt big because we were the only sport going, but now other sports are in arenas. So, and our days at the Apex are probably coming to a close. The negative of, and then going back on the road, it comes with the benefits of big arena. It just feels bigger, crowd. I talked about the kind of travel that's fun, where you get to see these different places. I have a lot of friends all over because of my journey through the broadcasting world. Like, I have friends in Denver, and I'm not going to like see them a lot, but if the UFC is going to Denver, I get to see them. I get to see, we were in Rochester, New York, and some people are just like, yeah, Rochester. I'm just like, well, I got a great college friend who lives in Rochester. I got to see him that week and have breakfast. I hadn't seen him in like 8 years, and I get to see my dad on the road sometimes, or my family, depending on where we are. But then the trade-off is, okay, now I'm away from my family for 4 days at a time, 3-4 days at a time, depending on where it is. So it's just like, there's pluses and minuses with both. Push comes to shove, back to normal, big arenas or whatever is going to be a blast. I'm going to miss the family. And all of a sudden I'm just be like, oh man, those Apex shows were really nice. So I just try to keep it even keeled and just be like, it is what it is. Like, this is our situation now. Complaining about it does nothing. Enjoying it for what it is does everything.
Yeah. The grass is always greener. I think for me, as a viewer, as a fan, I enjoy a full arena more than the Apex.
Yeah, of course. Right.
Just because, like, I feel like whenever like there's something that a fighter does, like this extravagant knockout or something really impressive, and they kind of lift their hands up and then you don't get that uproar of applause and cheers and adulation. Like, I feel bad for him. Like, he did this amazing thing. And obviously everyone on TV watched it, but like, there's that energy in the arena doesn't exist.
It exists in the Apex for main events. Like, there's some atmosphere for the main events because I don't know how many hundreds of people are in there, between 100 and 300 people. I don't know what it is, what's allowed, whatever. But like for Calvin Kattar and Giga Chikadze,
ooh, what a fight.
We had some great fights that night. And the crowd is like, okay, they're into it, whatever. But the main event, well, then you realize half of these people here are like Calvin Kattar's people. And there's a hell of a lot of people here because Giga now lives in Southern California. They're in supporting for Giga. So it was a great fight. And whatever. Then all of a sudden there was a big atmosphere, even for a couple of hundred people, because they were connected to the guys in that great fight. So the main events at the Apex is a very cool environment. I do feel bad for like Brian Kelleher, I think, fought for the 5th time that night in the Apex, and it's just like, gosh, that's got to suck for him. whatever. Again, it is what it is. But I know these fighters that have fought in the Apex 3, 4, 5 times in a row now are probably just like, gosh, can I get one of those full fan shows?
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, I don't know. I mean, we're going to London in March. I'm not going, but London in March is on the books. Columbus for a fight night event. I think, the Apex is still valuable, obviously we don't know what's next, but I think, hopefully we're not there every weekend for the fight nights coming soon.
Yeah. So I guess what is it like being part of the live broadcast team? Because I'm assuming so many moving parts, right? Like you're on air for 6 to 8 hours sometimes, depending on the event. Is it organized chaos, or is it just such a well-oiled machine at this point that everything just runs smoothly? And maybe just give a little bit of insight, if you can, as to the preparation that is done up to leading up to the event.
I mean, I would say it's a well-oiled machine from our perspective, but that's a testament to our whole crew behind the scenes. The producer, the supervising producer, the director. Like, I was in the TV truck before I started actually doing UFC cards, just to kind of shadow what was going on. I watched some fights out behind the announcers, and then I was in the TV truck, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of not yelling in a bad way, but there's a lot of people talking. There's a lot of people responsible for different things. There's the replay guys that everyone's on a headset communicating. That would make your head spin. That, I would say, probably is controlled chaos in terms of the symphony that needs to happen. Yeah. But for us out by the octagon, it's I'm calling the fights. I got analysts that are kind of there calling the fights with us. We have a stage manager to my left who's kind of passing these along. There's a support staff out there, but for the most part, the changes all happen behind the scenes in terms of what they need to make happen. Because what happens is we have a lot of content available. Our prelims, let's just say our prelim window is 3 hours, and we're supposed to get 7 fights in 3 hours. Well, if 5 of those fights go to a decision, and we always have those features. So, on the main event or the big fights later in the night. So as an example, recently the prelims, we had we had some decisions on the prelims in Cater and Chikadze. So we weren't able to run the feature about Calvin Cater's favorite restaurant back home and where he goes for his victory celebration. And I did a sit down interview with Giga that was turned into a feature that was 3 or 4 minutes long, and some certain bumps or whatever, Giga living in Huntington Beach and moving his family from all these things. And so if we don't get finishes in those fights, there's no time. Those are cutting room floor, which is kind of unfortunate because they're great features, but hopefully they can get repurposed in the future. If we get a couple of first round knockouts, well, now we got all the time to fill, because we can't just keep throwing fights out, because what happens if we get another first round finish? Well, we got to make it to the main card, which is 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific. And we can't just blitz through 3 first round finishes and be like, all right, see you guys in an hour and a half. That's why you got to space it out in between. But if you have a decision, that takes up that time block. So that's the real change. If you're a producer, all right, you're going to run this feature, that's out. We don't have time for it. So that's where all the changes happen in the controlled chaos, as you said. But for us, it's calling fights. And in terms of the preparation, to me, the most important is just knowing the heck out of these fighters. Really knowing them in terms of their story, where they've been, who they are, what they do well. I leave most of the fight stuff to the analyst, because Dominic Cruz is going to tell you he's got a really good jab, or look out for this combination. He likes to go to the body. That's not for me to say. So I don't really study the game film in that way. I more want to know, did they get married? Did they just have a baby? What's that been like for their training life? Have they had a death in the family that's really inspired them to push harder? Have they had support from their family? Whatever their story happens to be, is kind of the part of the storytelling that I want to do in this role. And then in addition to calling the fight. So how does that work? Do you have a sit down with each and every fighter on fight week and talk to them and try to get as much information or pertinent information that you can bring up during the broadcast? It's not a sit down with every fighter on Wednesdays. As in the COVID era, it's Wednesdays and we're on Zoom, and it's the broadcast team, and it's not every fighter. We'll meet with 10 to 12.
Okay.
and it'll be on Zoom, and like they'll be on one end and it'll be me. Let's say I'm working with Felder and Bisping will be on there. Our producers will be on there. And it's like just like a big kind of running Zoom chat. Talk to them for 10 to 20 minutes. And then like the next fighter comes in and kind of take your notes on that day. There's other ways to prepare it. The fighters do media in all different forms. Try to consume as much of that as possible. Fighters that go on YouTube to do different interviews like that we haven't met with. I have a podcast, which has been really beneficial to like, you know, I just talked to Sean Brady the other day. So now it's like the next time I call Sean Brady's fight, like I know him really well now. And like you get to have like this friendly relationship. And the more you do it, the more you just kind of add on to the people that you know in the, you know, the community of MMA that it is. And then get to know coaches. Like I'll text Eric Nixick, like, hey man, what do you like about this guy? You know, cause like he's Francis Ngannou's head coach, but he's also the head coach or like the head guy at Extreme Couture who sees this, you know, kid from Hawaii that showed up there 3 months ago. Like, hey, what makes him good? Whatever. Then you can kind of use that. So there's just a whole multi-pronged approach to just finding out whatever you can about any fighter that's there. Do
you have difficulty pronouncing some names? Because there are some, because this is an international, it's not only Americans, right? You got people from Kazakhstan and Dagestan and China and just all these different places across the world. And Polish names are hard. So I'm just like, I'm so impressed that you guys always get it.
Well, it was told to me, it was made very clear to me early on how important it is to get it right.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like more so than other places, like in terms of like, you know, in the NFL or college football, or, you know, you're not studying like the right, you could waste all your time learning every single name of the Clemson offensive line, you know what I mean? Or whatever it happens to be. So I get that. But then when they make a play or something, and they had an interesting kind of weird last name, whatever. But with us, it's one-on-one. Like you should get the names right. It's very clear. It's like if you're announcing tennis, you know, a lot different than fighting, but like there's 2 players here on this match. Like get the names right. You don't have to know 40 players. You got to know 2.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's very, very important. And that was kind of told to me early on. And so like, I've never had a problem with pronouncing names, right? As long as you know how they pronounce it, then just imitate it, you know, just say it. Some people I know have a problem with it because they can't like put it in their head how it sounds. And then they just revert back to seeing it. And then they want to say how they think it should sound. So like Davi Ramos, you know, from Brazil, like he was on the first UFC card that I called, and like we do some recordings beforehand in terms of here's what's coming up next, whatever. And so I said Davy Ramos because I didn't look up how he says his name. So I'm like, all right, Davy Ramos. And they're just like, it's not Davy Ramos, it's Davi Ramos. Yeah. And so, you know, like lesson learned early. And then so it's like, okay, it's not really a problem. Some of the names they don't roll off the tongue. I think of a Contender Series guy who got a contract. His name is Caio Bohailio. And so it's tough to say that quickly. Yeah. So in the back and forth of a fight, Caio Bohailio, you know, it's just not a word that's easy to say. But for the most part, like it's not a problem for me to get it right. It's, you know, there's obviously some names, but you know, even the fighters from China, like Sumu Darji, okay, it's just how it is. So some of the names that are really long, like Said Yokub Kakramanov, is a lot of letters.
Yeah. Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Joanna Jędrzejczyk. That one to me is pretty easy. You just have to know how to say it. Don't looking at it, you know?
Yeah. But if you're just reading it, you're like, how the hell am I pronouncing that?
Yeah.
I mean, you've done so many events by now. I mean, like you said, you've been with the sport about 5 years, and I doubt you remember each and every one, but are there a handful or maybe just a couple that really stand out as like special nights?
Oh man, I love that you framed that question that way, Roy. A lot of people say, what fights do you remember the most? And that answer can change every 5 minutes, right? Like, what's your favorite fight call? But the nights to remember is manageable because like special nights are much, you know what I mean? Like, okay, what's my favorite fight call? Uriah Faber's knockout, Donald Cerrone's finish, whatever. But favorite night. So you know, the first year, my first UFC event that I called was in Fresno in 2017, December of 2017. So in my first year, November of 2018, I was able to call the 25th anniversary show in Denver. And it wasn't like that was like the most amazing card of all time. I remember there was like some decisions. The main card was like, okay. It wasn't the most thrilling fights in the middle of the main card, but like Macy Barber was on that card. That was her UFC debut. And she like had lived in Colorado at the time. And so like, that was kind of a cool arrival as we celebrate 25 years. And then the whole night, just like celebrating 25 years in Denver where the UFC started. I was just like, wow, it's pretty cool that I've only done this job for like a year at this point, and they put me on a broadcast. I was kind of surprised that they put me on it. It's very neat. And then, that Cowboy Cerrone set the wins record and the finishes record against Mike Perry that night. And like, it was the first fight I believe he had since he became a dad. So he brings his baby in there and he holds him up like Simba, and then the main event was Yair Rodriguez and Korean Zombie, which is, one of the best fights I've called. So like, wild. At the end of that, like you're just buzzing off of energy like that. Uriah Faber in Sacramento is really cool. Some of these Apex ones have been good, but like the nights that I usually remember are the travel one. They're from the travel era. Like Greenville, South Carolina was really fun. Korean Zombie knocked out Hanato Moicano. Justin Gaethje over James Vick in Lincoln, Nebraska. The ones that are really, really special when you get a lot of finishes. In Nebraska, we had 9 finishes.
Wow.
In Rochester, New York, we had 9 finishes. Like, it's just afterwards, you're just like, that's the sport at its best. There was just energy in the arena. I don't care that we're in Rochester, New York. We just had 9 finishes, great fights. It's like, and I'm not like trying to speak down on Rochester, but it's not like these big shows, big media markets, championships on the line. It's a fight night. But when the fighters show up like that, it's they're nights to remember.
Are you buzzing after a night like that? Because me as a fan, I remember when there are certain fights where I'm like deeply emotionally invested.
Yeah.
It takes me a couple of hours. Like, I can't go to sleep. I remember back in New York where it would play longer than it is done. So the nights would finish at like 1 a.m. or something. I would only be able to sleep at like 3.
Yeah.
It's the same, off the adrenaline.
Same thing. I mean, not only were the fights great, like, so imagine your adrenaline watching at home and just like, oh man, that was incredible. To like play a role in it, right? To be the voice of it.
Yeah.
Whatever big moments happen. And then like, you go back to the hotel and everybody else is buzzing. So you're in the lobby bar, just like buzzing with everybody else. There's no more work to do for that weekend. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of like let your guard down and just be with the people. You got nothing hanging over your head as far as things that you need to get done. So you don't like have to, whatever. And then, and then social media is on fire. And then like, especially if you're in like a forward facing role, like a broadcaster like me, it's like, all right, then you got people like even saying stuff about you, which is like tough to turn off too. It's just like mostly good. Like, oh, what a great, like if I have a great call of a great main event that has everybody buzzing, I'm buzzing too. Cause I'm just like, oh, like I'm analyzing how I did. And then I'm like, oh, was that a good call? Then you're a highlight, then you're on like the UFC social media channels is just like your big exclamation point. So yeah, like, especially the full arena shows nowadays, it's not as, the shows get over here pretty early, like 7:30. I'm like back at home eating dinner by like 8:30 at night. Yeah. And then, so like, since I'm right back into like the normal home environment, the buzz doesn't last as long. Yeah. Because I'm like, it's not like I'm in an environment where everybody's talking about it. And I can't believe, whatever. So, I'm still looking at my phone a little bit and kind of reacting to what happened. But, when you're in the hotel, when you're on the road with everybody that's just gathered, that experience that all together, it lasts for a while.
Do you think fighters are not, because you just mentioned something now and it sparked a thought in me. What's the girl's name? She has like a Greek name. That last weekend she fought and she jumped in Joe Rogan's arms and she became kind of viral.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Vanessa Demopoulos. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I don't understand why fighters don't take an opportunity, because she didn't like she had an okay fight. She was knocked down and then she took the opportunity and she finished the fight, but she took the bigger opportunity when at the end of the fight, she became this viral sensation. I think she like quadrupled her following online.
Right.
And now she's a name that people know. And she was on an undercard. And a lot of people, they fight on the undercard. And, it's a good fight or it's not a good fight. And a lot of times they're forgettable because they just go in there, oh, I want to thank my family. I want to say this and that's great. I'm not saying anything bad about that.
Yeah.
But I just feel like the people who capitalize on that 30-second or that minute post-fight, when they get on the mic and they spit something hot and then they go viral and they grow their following because of it, it's such a big opportunity that I personally just feel like a lot of fighters miss out when they don't capitalize.
Yeah, and I think it's easy for us to say because it seems like it should be easy, but I don't think it's that easy.
Oh, no, I'm not saying it's easy.
Right.
I'm not saying it's easy.
And so like,
it's just an opportunity.
Yeah. And but back to what we were talking about with like, it's tough to grow up in the public eye. Like it's tough to have your career play out in the public eye and things that you wish you had done or did that were cringy or whatever. I think it's tough to be a fighter in a lot of respects. Some people it's not tough for, and then those are the ones that become the big stars. But sometimes when you're surrounded by what you have to remember is that some of these fighters are shy people. Like they'll openly tell us like, yeah, man, like in the training room, I'm a beast, but like you put these cameras in front of me and I know that everybody's watching on TV and the lights and it's competing and Dana White's over there and whatever. It's like they shell up a little bit because they just love martial arts. Yeah. They'd rather fight with 5 people watching them. So it's easy to say like, yeah, man, have that viral moment. It'll be great for you. More people will pay attention to you. You'll make more money. You'll have more sponsorships. You'll have a bigger social media following. You have the chance to be a star faster instead of just letting your fighting do all the talking. But the UFC is like so cool because it just allows people to be who they are. Yeah. And the people that are who they are and not afraid of it, like to the next level and have these personalities, then those are the ones that people gravitate towards. So if you just get on the mic and you just say, I just want whoever the UFC gives me next, man, I just love to compete. And you become one of the many that say that, then okay, you might get to the top, but it's going to take way longer. And Vanessa is just like, we talked to her before her UFC debut on the fighter meeting because she was a newcomer and whatever. And she behaved exactly how she behaved to Joe Rogan in front of all the cameras, in front of the lights and everything. The same way that she did on our fighter meeting. She's just like, oh, I'm just ready. After that 10-minute fighter meeting, it's just like, wow, she's fun to talk to. Like there's more energy in the room because like she just brings a high amount of energy. So like, I don't think it was like, I'm going to win. And then Joe Rogan's going to interview me. And then I'm going to jump in his arms and it's going to be awesome. Like she was totally just in the moment and that's who she is. And if you're going to be who you are, but you happen to not be that personality, it's going to take longer. If you try to manufacture it, it might work. People will spot it. Yeah. Cejudo, Colby, whatever, but it still might work. And if you're okay with being that, if you're okay with kind of being something, playing a part instead of just being who you are, then, it's all like what you're okay with,
True. Yeah.
But like if I said to you, like, okay, you need an awesome nickname. You need to, why don't you have a nickname? You know what I mean? It's just like, because that feels weird. Like people tell me sometimes, why don't you have a catchphrase? Well, it feels weird to have a catchphrase. It feels very unlike me. Like it feels very ego driven to like, pay attention to me. This is when I say this, the crowd loves it. Like, I don't think that way. Yeah. So would it be good for me to have this awesome catchphrase and put it on t-shirts and market it and copyright it and whatever? I mean, financially it would, but like, it wouldn't be, it seems like it's trying too hard sometimes. So I think that's the battle that the fighters face.
No, it's true. I gravitate towards authenticity. And,
exactly.
But that could be fine. Like I would gravitate more towards a Robbie Lawler, who's just this brawler, but super, understated, quiet, I guess you can say shy person. Yeah. I gravitate more towards that than a Henry Cejudo or a Colby, that it's an act and it's like WWE and it's not authentic and it's not real and it's annoying. Yeah. So if he gets on the mic and just be and speaks for his truth, for what it is. He doesn't have to jump in Joe Rogan's arms.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I personally just gravitate more towards authenticity. But yeah, you're right. You're
but
right.
Sometimes it's it's tough to be, it's easy to be authentic. I can sit here and be authentic, but to then really kind of
with the cameras and everything,
bring down the barriers and say like, I'm not going to just tell you anything to put out in public forum that like all my thoughts and beliefs on politically and all these other things, like that's a dangerous thing to go down. Not that everybody gets political, but just to put yourself out there is not as easy as you'd say. Now, I think there's room for both. The perfect juxtaposition is like, well, Colby and Jorge Masvidal is kind of pretty good juxtaposition of somebody who's known to be like, he's as real as it gets. He doesn't care when Masvidal and Colby's playing this part. There's room for both. I like both of them in the fight game in terms of like what they bring to the table. Nate Diaz, same thing. And when people say like to make a lot of money, that you got to be fake and you got to play this character. And I'm like, I point to Dustin Poirier. Like, look at Dustin Poirier. The guy's awesome. The guy is like very, very authentic. He's using his platform to pay it forward, to do good in his community. Like he's somebody who he's doing okay for himself. You know, probably took him a little bit longer as he kind of found his footing as what could be possible, but like you can do it in all different ways. You don't have to be fake. You don't have to have fake animosity and disrespectful and all that other stuff. The people that do that, they're fine too. They make the fight game fun. So I like it all.
Yeah, for sure. What before I let you go, and this is kind of off the top of my head, what are some exciting fights that you would like to see that have not been announced this year? Like if you could play matchmaker, like what are a few fights that you would love to see play out this year?
I like Ortega and Cater after what we just saw. I don't really know what the rumors are on, I mean, those guys don't have fights booked. Interested to see who Cheeto fights next. Like he should fight somebody in the top 10. And I don't think there's a bad fight for him in the top 10. I don't know. Who did Cruz just beat? Cruz just beat Pedro Munoz. You know, Cruz and Cheeto would be fun.
Ooh, that would be good.
I don't know if that, you know, I don't know if they'd say, like, I know that they would say yes to it, whatever, but promotional sense and ranking sense or whatever. Colby and Masvidal is as good as it gets in terms of a grudge match and the story behind it and something that you're going to be emotionally invested in. So that one was made. So yeah, like there's some good ones out there. I'm just focused on the next card, and I don't even know who's fighting on the next card type of thing. It's just like
Strickland, no?
The train just keeps rolling. Strickland and Hermanson, that's right. But in terms of the other ones, I got to look at that card again and get back in that mode. But yeah, I mean, you make good fights in every division.
Yeah. It should be fun, the Strickland fight, because he's a big trash talker, and if you're in the Apex, you could probably pick up a lot of what he's saying.
His rise has been like this weird kind of funny thing.
He's hilarious on Twitter too, by the way.
Well, it's just like you talk about being authentic and not being afraid to be who you are and say whatever you want to say. I mean, Sean Strickland is the poster child for not being afraid of it. And as a result, he's more popular, has more of a following because of it. Mm-hmm. He's just like, what I always think about when Sean Strickland's like at a press conference or on the mic is just like what are the executives at ESPN thinking right now? You know what I mean? Like the Disney executives that maybe, let me tune into this UFC. Disney owns ESPN and UFC. Let's see what this new property is we bought. And then Strickland goes on and he's talking about God knows what. You're just like, I just put myself in their shoes of the people that got to report earnings calls and that sort of stuff. And then, oh man, what's he going to say that's going to go viral and be this damage control thing, whatever. But
he's a PR disaster.
The UFC is cool because of that. It's like very international waters in that sort of respect.
Yeah, he's a PR disaster, but that's what makes him entertaining.
I mean, that's one of the parts about the UFC. Like there are PR disasters and there are PR dreams, and it's all dealing with it. Back to how we started the conversation, it mimics real life. Like we have people in our lives. It's just like I prefer if they don't come to the barbecue at my house, but they're good friends with this person. We're just gonna deal with it, you know. And like the UFC, it just, and MMA in general, just it mimics how the world works. It's fascinating to watch play out.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, this was a lot of fun, man. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Roy. This was good to meet you. I like conversations like this that aren't about previewing the next card and this and that. It's about, bigger picture topics that we can get into. So I knew your show was about that based on kind of what I saw. So I was like, yeah, I like these shows.
Oh man, I'm glad you came on. I wanted to learn, more about you and maybe give the listeners a little bit behind the scenes look at what it's like to be part of a broadcast team for the UFC.
Yeah.
So thanks for being open and talking to us today. And where can people find you? Plug the best places.
Yeah. The podcast that I have on my own is called Fitz Nation. That's long form interviews, much like this, with UFC fighters and people in the MMA and UFC world. Kind of has a spin on personal development, on being your best self, and like back to the point of trying to take something from everything, trying to learn from these fighters, like maybe what we can take into our own lives to level up. And then, I'm on social media at Brendan Fitz TV.
Cool. All right, guys, go follow it. I love your YouTube channel, by the way. I watched the videos.
Yeah.
And thanks again, man. This was a blast.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.